Good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 5, which is our cultural competency topic today. This is week 5 of the Developmental Disabilities Institute Leadership Webinar Series. We welcome you. It seems like we have a good core group now of about 40 to 50 participants each week, which we're very happy about, and want to thank you for participating and getting your homework in. I'm Elizabeth Jenks. I'm the Associate Director for Training and Community Support here at the Institute. I have my colleague today with me, Julia Hernandez, who has a great deal of expertise in cultural competency, and I'm going to have her introduce herself in a moment. I just want to say a few words. I did receive last week's homework. It is working out much better for you to send that directly to that DDI website versus sending it to me. DDI email address. I'm sorry. And this week, I'd like for you to get your pre and post tests in and your homework assignment, which you'll see at the end of the presentation, again, by Tuesday at 5 p.m. And we are really tracking those, okay? So when your email comes in, obviously your time is on there. If you're faxing them, which many of you are, the dates and time are on there. So we do know when they're coming in. And to be fair to everyone, 5 o'clock is the deadline. Yes, there's been a few exceptions for illnesses, medical emergencies, things like that. We can be flexible. We understand things happen. But for the most part, I need them in here 5 o'clock Tuesday. So thank you so much for being so vigilant with that the last few weeks. And without further ado, I know you all know about me, but I'd like you to learn a little bit more about my good friend and colleague, Julia Hernandez.
Hello, everybody. I'm Julia, and I work here at the Institute with Elizabeth and Mike. I have 4 children. My oldest was born with severe impairments. He was born with a lot of neurological problems and a lot of eye problems. I caught a disease when I was pregnant with him. It's called toxoplasmosis, and it's a virus that destroys parts of the eyes and brains of fetuses when a pregnant woman catches it. And usually it's caused by cats. I've never had a cat, so I don't know how, where, or when I caught it. I just know I was pregnant, and it directly affected our lives. But because of that, I've been able to work in disability advocacy for over 20 years, and I've been able to learn a lot about special education, medical issues, how to advocate for families. And because I am from the Latino community, I was born and raised in Mexico, partly, and traveled back and forth between the United States and Mexico. I was able to help families from Latino backgrounds to understand disability and accept it and help their children. I think that's enough about me.
Okay, thank you, Julia. I'd like to show you a little clip now of our Possibilities series. Many of you are familiar with this. You can also access these stories of people living fully included lives, meaningful lives in their communities. And we have different little stories. They're between 5 and 7 minutes long. Last week we didn't show any, but this week the story of Karen, who is actually a family that Julia works with and lives in the community with. We'd like to show you how school inclusion has really affected her life in a beautiful and positive way. And it's also a nice, I think, segue from our guest speaker last week, Jennifer Greening, lecture on inclusive schools. So I'd like to show this little clip on Karen right now.
Cuando estaba embarazada siempre mi ilusión fue tener un bebé. Siempre pensé muchas cosas, que se iba a hacer flaquita, grandota, chiquita, pero nunca pensé que pudiera nacer enferma.
There is this whole stigma of having a child with a disability in the Latino community. We don't talk a lot about it, but it does exist, and oftentimes it's connected to sin. So you misbehaved and obviously you are punished. This is your punishment.
De la familia de mi esposo pensaban que era algo, como algo malo que hicimos. El escuchar los comentarios me afectó bastante.
So I've been trying to break some of those stigmas with the families by providing just opportunities for the families to do different things. And we're working towards inclusion to have these children and these families participate in everyday life.
El ver que no era la única, que había muchas personas que tenían un niño con una discapacidad de diferentes condiciones, me ha ayudado bastante.
She has Williams syndrome. It's a rare genetic disorder that leads to difficulties in development.
People with Williams syndrome tend to be very social, very happy people. Mom was concerned that Karen didn't have appropriate social skills, so she wanted to work on social skills for Karen so that she could behave more appropriately when she was with other children. And we looked at different opportunities, and I said, I've heard really good things about Cesar Chavez. Why don't you try that school? And she already had her other children enrolled in Cesar Chavez, and
she loved it. Before she got here, she was in a self-contained classroom. So she spent grades 1 through 9 in a self-contained classroom where it's nothing but special ed kids, and it's real simple. They'll give them some toys or some building blocks, and here, have at it.
The difference was just night and day because now she's with regular
enhancers. So Karen is in a fully inclusive classroom all day, every day. She sits next to all her peers who are at different levels of learning as she is. And she has the support of an aide who is with her all day, every day. We've been reading Green Eggs and Ham for about 4 months now. We've yet to finish it, but every day we start at the first page. And if we have to stop for 20 minutes and work on the word that, we're going to stop for 20 minutes and work on the word that.
Karen has the potential to do so much more than was being asked of her before. And I really believe that Mr. Williams and the special ed department and her teachers here have really fostered her ability to grow as a student and pushing her to do more than was expected of her before.
We right away noticed progress with Karen. She started doing more academics and just maturing more like a regular teenager.
Ha sido un cambio total. De ver a Karen de contar del 1 al 10, de decir 2, 3 letras del abecedario, ha sido un cambio enorme para mí. A lo mejor es un cambio, un paso bien pequeñito para su nivel académico, pero para mí es algo enorme ver el cambio que ha tenido, que ahora ella empieza a leer un poquito, palabras pequeñas, a escribir.
If Karen was in an inclusive environment from the beginning, if she started in the 1st grade, what she knows now, she would have known in the 5th grade. So we could be going further with this. We could be working on money and things that she really needs to know to be independent. And that's ultimately what I think everybody wants, is her independence.
The advantages are many for Karen to be here because she has a potential to live a life much fuller, really focused on what she wants. Where before it was whatever is available, whatever
we think, where now it's really, the sky is the limit.
In 2 years from now, I fully expect to see Karen in her cap and gown, smiling and walking across the stage and with all her peers and getting a certificate like everyone else.
Bueno, sé que el estado de Michigan les ofrece educación hasta los 26 años y quiero que siga en la escuela, que aprenda un oficio.
The children with special needs are eligible for services beyond the 4th year of high school by law. And so when we get closer to that period of time, we'll start to have more and more discussion with mom. That's part of servicing her here at the school to determine, what would be the appropriate next step.
Karen is ready to go. She's ready to finish school, graduate, and move on. And Mom has a little more reluctance, part of it is our Latino culture and overprotect, but we're working on getting her ready. So when Karen is ready, Mom is also ready.
Me duele, pero lo estoy viendo una Karen más independiente, alguien que no quiere estar tiempo con mami. Y la veo trabajando, la veo haciendo sus cosas por ella sola.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that wonderful story about Karen and how Karen's life has changed in her community. Today we're going to go through the lecture objectives. These are the learner objectives. We're going to talk about and be able to define how culture impacts our daily lives, identify 3 ways culture influences a family, identify 3 ways culture influences individuals, identify 3 strategies to effectively engage culturally diverse individuals and families, identify how to engage Hispanic families, demonstrate how and why to use the social worker's cultural awareness checklist. So our agenda will be that I will go through some of my slides, and then Julia has a presentation for you on engaging Hispanic families, as well as some stories and examples of how you can do that in your practice, in your work. And then we're going to go through together the cultural awareness checklist that you should have all received via email. This is one of my favorite definitions of culture. It's by E.T. Hall, and yes, I know it's 1976. He's a very famous sociologist, anthropologist, and I like this definition because it is so comprehensive and really helps us wrap our heads around how influential your culture is in our societies. Various cultures are influencing not only our daily lives, but our societal vision. Culture is a man's medium. There's not one aspect of human life that is not touched and altered by culture. This means personality, how people express themselves, the way they think, how they move, how problems are solved, how their cities are planned and laid out, how transportation systems function and are organized, as well as how economics and government systems are put together and function. Ethnicity, this is a traditional definition of ethnicity, and it takes into account a person's national origin, race, and religion. And your culture influences your daily living, how you might keep your house, where you might live in your community, the types of food you like to eat, customs, religious celebrations, you know, when you celebrate life milestones, like how a marriage is celebrated, death, okay? So it's really, your ethnicity is one of these things that really permeates our daily life. Now, there's some words of caution on this definition of ethnicity, and we always have to keep in mind that just because, you know, a person is European, right, this is an example, or say, you know, Australian, or whatever countries they may originate from, within any large area, there are separate countries that celebrate their own culture and perhaps in a different way. And then it gets a little more complicated because even within that culture, different things will influence it, like how well individuals are educated, their poverty level, their socioeconomic status, and other things can influence it. So a word of caution, you know, just because someone is English, you know, German heritage or Italian or Hispanic, within that culture, there are many variations of how people will act and do things based on their culture. Okay, so it is complicated and there's different things to take into consideration, so we don't want to overgeneralize. Now, historically speaking, in America, there was a theory called the melting pot theory. This is where people kind of came to our country and they assimilated as quickly as possible into the dominant culture. When the Irish came in the late 1800s, early 1900s, in droves because of the potato famine, they were, obviously they already spoke English, but they quickly, changed how their style of dress, tried to get educated as quickly as possible, and leave their roots, so to speak, to assimilate to dominant American culture of that time. I'm Italian, and I know that my Italian immigrants that came to our country in the 1900s did the same thing. And I remember my mother's stories about, she came here as a 1-year-old, and she learned to speak English very, very quickly and did not speak Italian outside of the home because she didn't want to be embarrassed. So she quickly learned to assimilate to the dominant culture. And people were made fun of oftentimes if they were of different cultures. So there was this pressure to look American and become American as quickly as you could, and to deny your culture of heritage. Today, it's different. People are respecting and recognizing their culture and their cultural heritage. They're working with their children to preserve their culture. Many families come to America now, and they send their children to special schools on the weekends so that they can learn their native language, and they preserve their cultural celebrations on a regular basis. And they incorporate these traditions into their daily life as they live in our country and work. So there is a difference in the respect of one's culture, the pride of one's culture, and this is very important because being healthy and as individuals and as a family system, it's important to respect one's culture. Because remember what we said early on in the presentation, culture does influence your daily life, and a recognition of your culture and a respect of your own culture leads to the respect of other people's culture and recognition of the importance of culture and the influence on daily life. Before we actually go into the culture of disabilities, what I'd like to do is show you kind of a funny little, we're going to do a lighthearted today view of what can happen when people don't understand other people's culture. And this is a little clip. It's 2 minutes long. It's from one of my favorite shows, which was on a few years back. But Seinfeld had a funny episode, and this is kind of an exaggerated but a new example of what happens when you don't respect culture.
They're going to be publishing Grandma's coffee table book? I do have big guy. Ready? Oh, you got yourself a cold? Oh, get yourself some vitamin C with rose hips and myoflavinoid. I asked you here as I caught your appearance on Regis and Kathy Lee. That's pretty good. Anyway, the thing here is that it would be best if you didn't do any more of these shows. Well, because of the coughing thing? Kramer, I'm sorry. What about Sonia Lana? You're not canceling Sonia Lana. She's a doctor. Kramer. People from Matsushima here. All right. I'll be right there. Well, this is it. Wait. Without this merger, we'd be out on the street. All right. They sure saved us. Selectman, it is with great pride that we undertake this partnership with your company. I'm sorry, I can't shake your hand right now. It's just because I'm just taking to the justice. So, I want to need失礼なことして、この大切な時は仕事をダメにしまった。I must have had a aid in my mouth. I couldn't talk. Why'd you have to keep so vague? Because they're judging things. I'm having start a chain reaction that would lead to the end of independent publishing? Lead to the end of Kramer's coffee table. Well, I knew he had a cold. How'd you expect him to blow his nose?
So that's a lighthearted look. I hope you all enjoyed that. That's a funny view, but it can happen, right? You can see how things got out of control because there was this lack of knowledge about the culture of the people that they were trying to achieve the eventual contract with. So it's just something to think about. Let's talk about the culture of disability. And this is something that was new to me when I started working in the field of developmental disability. And I learned more about this from people I worked with who had disabilities, and they talked about this culture of disability.
I had before, but there are people who have disabilities, whether it be intellectual, developmental, mental health, or physical disabilities, view themselves as having a subculture within their identified culture, and that would be this identified culture that they share about disability. And you can get more information about that. I've read some works with Ed Roberts. He's the father of the Center of Independent Living movement. Judy Heumann, in her book, she's the former director of Health and Human Services, a very well-known advocate. John Hockenberry, one of the authors of the Americans with Disability Act, who uses a wheelchair. Joseph Shapiro talks a great deal about the culture of disability in his book, No Pity. And I would recommend, if you want to learn more about that, look up any of these individuals' work, because they do talk about this shared experience they have as an individual who has a disability. And so it's really something to consider, as we're working with people who have disabilities. And probably many of you are familiar with the strong culture identification between people who have hard of hearing or they're deaf. There's a very strong culture there. We have to consider these things in our practice. So these are some best practices now. Let's talk about cultural considerations when working with families. Okay, some things we need to think about. And that is, who's the leader in the family? Who should we engage? In some culture, it's both parents. In some cultures, it's the female. In some cultures, it's the male. We need to know that. So we're not engaging an individual who is not going to be able to follow through on our suggestions, or isn't going to be coming to things if they're not the contact person that you need to be engaging. So you want to identify who is that leader in the family. How does the culture perceive disability? This is very important, and Julia is going to talk more about this in her presentation. When and why did that family immigrate to America? All right, this is very important. All right, some people come here for economic reasons. Some people come here because of political oppression, natural disasters, or political asylum. When you're working with families of different cultures, and they have come here very quickly because they're seeking political asylum or they were oppressed in their country, they may have other issues that you need to think about that are related to the reasons why they left their country of origin. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in the next slide and why that's important to know. You need to also understand that some cultures, the behaviors that you see in their home or when they're with their children, you may perceive them as being odd, but they might be the norm for that culture. So before you become, judgmental about a family, maybe you see, the children seem to be up very late or sleeping in, and we're going to talk more about some of those things as we proceed through the presentation. Be careful. I'm going to put a yellow caution flag up on this, because
before we jump to conclusions, we have to understand these may be healthy norms within that culture. Best practice right now is multicultural pluralism. We've kind of come from this idea back when I was in social work school here at Wayne State University. We've kind of tried to learn as much as we could about different cultures. And we are such a culturally diverse country, and the world is so diverse that there came this school of thought that, hey, we can't possibly learn about every culture. We can't. But what are the common threads running through cultural competency that we need to know so we can engage families respectfully? Be aware of a family's culture. And you need to be aware of your own culture. And we're going to ask a question later on, so you can start thinking about this now. You know, how many people don't perceive themselves as being a part of a culture? There are people out there like that. And to them I say things because you might not even know how your culture is influencing you in ways that, you know, customs have been carried down, and you might, do we do that? You know, why do we celebrate a holiday like this? And when you start asking your parents, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, you might find out that way back when these came from their country of origin, this is how they do things. So again, there's another caution. I come across people, not very often, but once in a while they say, oh, you know, culture. So think about this a little more deeply. And your homework, too, will prompt some of this in the upcoming week. Families they determine how they cope with a disability. Julia's going to talk about this in her presentation on Hispanic and Latino families. And I will say that in some Arabic culture, there's a view that something has happened in your past or a past life in Asian cultures. And understand when we're engaging families that this is complicated, and how they view how they came to have this child with a disability is important. And unlocking the code to working with them effectively. Now remember on that previous slide, I said it's important people come to this country and the reasons they come here. Sometimes when families have come from another country to our country and they've come from a crisis, these are two systems you may see. And you must recognize them so that you'll be able to effectively engage them in practice, okay? Families keep the family from inviting and trusting others into their inner circle. And disengaged families, they kind of reject the individual's families, and they certainly will not invite and engage with people outside their culture. Right? So those are things that can happen because people are coming to this country, you know, negative, or oppressed past, and so they come here and they're going to be enmeshed because they're only going to trust each other. And they're going to be very, you know, very reluctant to trust people who are, say, in official capacities, working for state governments or any type of large agency or organization, because they may have had a negative experience in their country with some of these systems. Think about here is that not only does this occur when people come to our country from, you know, oppressed or political asylum, but also when you're working with families, you need to think about seeing some of these symptoms of enmeshment, and that can also occur when family systems are unhealthy, when there can be abuse. There can be happening that have created these unhealthy systems. They're important to recognize because they're going to help you in working with the families in the future. Here are some more multicultural pluralism strategies. We have to take time to learn about the culture of the people we support. There's so many places you can go now. You can get online, you can go to your library, you can talk with people of different cultures and learn more about their family system and their culture of origin. You should know how that culture views disability, and we said this in an earlier slide, know who to engage in that family. If a language barrier exists, work with a translator. Don't work with the children, all right, because what you're going to do there is you're going to change who the leadership is in that family. You're undermining the authority of the parent in this situation. I know Julia is going to talk more about translation and appropriate translators and how important this is. So a translator is not just a translator, and I know Julia is going to talk more about that. This is something I really try to do. Learn a few phrases in that country's language. I was in another country a few years ago, and I was going to learn how to say hello. I was in the United Arab Emirates, and one of the individuals from that culture said to me, you want to really engage people, don't just learn to say hello. Say hi and how are you, and they'll be impressed. And I was kind of a little nervous about that because I could barely get hello out in Arabic, but then I took the time to memorize it, and when I said it, there were smiles on people's faces, and then that just kind of relaxed me, and throughout my presentation I could tell they were engaged. So it's just something to consider. Network with community agencies and make sure your agency recognizes culture. Take a look around your agency. Do you have artwork that reflects different cultures? Does your website show people of different cultures? I know Michael Bray, he does a really nice job of making sure that our work here at the Institute reflects different cultures, and I hope it makes people, as they come onto our website, feel more comfortable, or come into our agency, feel more comfortable. All right, I would like to now have Julia do her presentation, and then we have a little short video on YouTube again on training social workers that we'll conclude with.
So one of the things to consider when you're working with any race, not only Latino, is really you need to respect what other people believe and their parenting style, even if you don't agree with it. I've had, and I'm going to use mostly examples, I've had a lot of families that I don't agree with their parenting style, but that doesn't mean that I go in and I tell them, okay, you're doing things wrong. I need to be able to get into the home first or meet with the family so that they can trust me and I can help the child, because ultimately my main goal is to help the child get the services, get this family established, and see that child grow and the family not live with so much stress. Particularly special education and medical are really what I try to focus on. So, for example, I had this one family who has 2 children with disabilities and a daughter. And the daughter was having a hard time accepting that she had these 2 brothers who have pretty severe, significant disabilities going on. And she just didn't want to be part of that family and was struggling with it. So the mother was trying to force her into accepting the brothers by telling her that she was going to take over when mom died, which was stressing the child more, and she wanted less and less to do with her siblings. So I couldn't say, don't do that, right? So once I got into the home, I sat with mom and I said, you need to rethink how you're talking to your daughter because you're putting her under a lot of stress. And because of that, she is now pulling out more and more from this family. And mom wouldn't do it. It got to the point that the daughter actually became a gang member and just got into a lot of trouble. Later on, I saw mom and she said, you were right. I should have listened. And she just was not willing to cooperate and listen. Sometimes you can't change people, but you can try. And I want you to think about everything that you've listened to so far and everything that I'm going to say, and take it out of your brain for a second. Take everything out, because not everybody's going to fit into the same thought. Whoever thought was created by whoever, not everybody can fit into that thought. So take everything out and just remember that you have to respect that person's thoughts and then bring everything back in and try to work individually with every family. Just like we work with IEPs, individualized education plans, individually with every child, we have to do that with culture too. And I want to talk a little bit about enmeshed families and disengaged families for a second, because like I said, I'm from the Latino community, and everything's about family. Everything revolves around family. I'm also Mexican Catholic, which means everything's a sin. If it tastes good, smells good, feels good, it's bad. So in our culture, unfortunately, sometimes things are exaggerated a lot. And for some families outside of the Latino community, they see us like, why would they do that? Why do they all live in the same house? Well, we don't all live in the same house, but my sister, my mother, my brother, and myself live on the same block, literally. Not the same street, the same block. We could walk out the door and I could yell, are my kids out there? And my sister will come out and say, no, they're not. They're at mom's or wherever they're at. So we all are kind of raising the children as a family. And for some cultures, that's way too much. But for us, it's normal. So you might not agree with some of the things that happen with some families, but that's the way that culture might be. Some people are illegal in the country, and Elizabeth talked a little bit about that. So trust might not be something that they do automatic from other groups outside of their community or outside, period, even within their community. You know, they might be thinking, well, I'm illegal here. Who are they going to talk to? Who are they going to give information to? So they don't open to other cultures. So be careful. It takes a little while. I had this one family who had a child who was very ill in the hospital, had been in the hospital for months. And the grandmother would tell her daughter, who was the mother of the child, don't talk to that woman. We're from the same culture. We're from the same country. And she would not allow her daughter to talk to me. Now, the child is about 14 years old, and she still calls me. Grandma still calls me. She'll say, I have this problem. I'm trying to get these services. Can you help me with this? But in the beginning, she would not even allow for a conversation. So it took a little while, but we eventually got there. So think about that. Disengaged families can also be, they not only reject families within their community, but outside of their culture. So it might not be you. You know, it's just the way it is because of all the different situations that families go through. Like I said, immigration is one of the big issues, and so just be careful. It takes a little while. How do I move to the next one? Racism and fear. Because of all the different situations, there is a lot of fear that sometimes comes out as racism, but it's not really directly because of your race. It just might be because that person is fearful of what is it that you want to do exactly. Do not be afraid to ask questions, but just be very careful when you're asking questions, because sometimes people just don't openly talk about their situation, and some do. Some do it way too much. I was working with this one family once, and we were filling out paperwork for a hospital, and I asked Mom, so what does your husband work in? And she says, he's a drug dealer. And I said, okay, we're out in the open, we're in a hospital, there's people around us. I said, self-employed. Now let's move on. I thought, we can't address the situation right now, but some families just talk way more than you want to learn about them, and some just will not talk about very little or nothing at all. This one's very important about internet translations, okay? Do not use internet translation sites unless you have a proofreader. Some of the situations I have noticed, like people will say, well, that squiggly line on top of the N really doesn't mean anything. The word año, for example, means years. So if you're putting down Johnny is 10 years old, and you do not use the squiggly line, it means anus. So you're really saying Johnny has 10 anuses. The difference is huge. Just that little squiggly line. And you could actually be offending people when you're translating using those sites. So you have to be very, very careful when you do that. I worked at a hospital years ago, and these doctors were using these sites to discharge the families. And this woman is just frantic and sees that I'm Latino. It's pretty obvious. And she comes up to me and she asked me in Spanish, "Do you speak Spanish?" I said, "Yes." She said, "The doctor gave me this paper, and it says to feed my billy goat so many times a day and to feed him this and this and this. I don't have a goat. Why does it say that?" Well, the doctor was using kid. Feed your kid so many times a day, these foods, yada, yada. And when it translates, it will translate exactly the word. And a lot of times it misses the meaning. So be very careful about using anything like that. If you do have a proofreader, you might as well just start from scratch and use the proofreader as a translator interpreter. And the difference between translation and interpretation is that the translator is going to do written work, where the interpreter is going to use verbal information and is going to interpret it into the other language. So, like I said, be very careful when you use these sites because they do not do a good work. I have tried many sites. None of them has done a good work. I just came back from a mini conference in Wisconsin, and everybody, this was people, composed of people from different states, and everybody says the same thing. Nobody has found a good site that can actually do good work. Now, for 1 word, 2 words, it's fine. At least you get some ideas of what to use. But for a sentence or a phrase, definitely not. Some of the things I do, of the activities I provide, I wear a couple of hats. I do everything in Spanish for my activities. I provide workshops mostly and some meetings in Spanish, mostly on special education and related topics. I will talk a little bit about some of the hats I wear later on, but I typically have anywhere from 10 to 25 families on a regular basis, like when it's bad weather or just schools have a half a day or something like that. I'll probably only have 10 families, but I can have up to 25 families. I don't have to do a lot of the work anymore because families text each other, they recruit families, they talk about what we do, and so the group has grown into a bigger and bigger group that meets. Even if they have heard the workshops, they will come again just to get a refresher course, and these same families, the ones that participate the most, will go to IEPs with each other, doctor's appointments, and help each other so that it doesn't stretch me to try to do everything. If I do not schedule something on a regular basis, the parents will call me and say, "We haven't met in a couple of weeks or this month. What's going on? Are you okay? When are you going to schedule something?" Or sometimes the children will tell the parents, "Call Julia and see if we're going to have something," because I do activities during the summer, and I'll talk a little bit about it later on. Most of the workshops, like I said, are regarding special education or IEP and related topics. And with this, I do 2 series of workshops. One are through the Institute here at DDI, where I do special education law, the IEP, the least restrictive environment, and transition. The least restrictive environment is very important because a lot of families consider that having your child in a segregated facility or a self-contained classroom is okay. because they're taken care of, they're fed, their diapers changed, if they're in diapers, things like that. But as we've had more and more children included into the neighborhood schools, families are realizing that academics are very important too. That even though the child might have a disability, they also have an ability, and let's work on that ability. What can this child do, and how can we help this child become independent and be part of society? So at the beginning, it was very hard because families were content with whatever services they were getting because they figured, I'm not going to get this anyway in my country, so whatever I get here is fine. Where now they're looking at quality and how can we have a better quality of education for this child and a better quality of life for this child and family. I do have formal and informal meetings. Oh, let me go back one second. I also have a subcontract with Michigan Alliance for Families. Every state has something called a PTI, a Parent Training and Information Center. In Michigan is Michigan Alliance for Families. They do not have staff that is bilingual and speaks Spanish. So they subcontract with me, and I do some of their workshops too. So when I'm doing workshops, I'm either wearing the hat of DDI or wearing the hat of DDI with the Michigan Alliance hat as well. In the informal and formal meetings, we sometimes do work together collaboratively with math. Like, for example, last Friday, there was a training on assistive technology that Detroit Public Schools was putting together with math, and so I went in to interpret for some families that went there who speak Spanish, and we kind of sat in the back and talked about the different technology opportunities that children can have. This opens their eyes into other possibilities, so when they go to IEPs, they can think of not only getting services, but getting appropriate services for the child with a disability. During the summer, one of the situations we were encountering was that families were starting to get services through the schools, but really not including their child in everyday today activities in their neighborhoods, and that was a problem. So I said, let's start having some groups out in the parks in Southwest Detroit. There's a couple of parks that are barrier-free, and so what we look for are parks that have some type of gating around it, so because we do have runners, and we want safety to be the main concern so that families feel secure and comfortable when they go outside. And we started with few families attending not only the workshops, but also the summer groups. Now when I don't have something scheduled, this is particularly where the children come in place. They will tell their mothers or the family members that when are we going to meet for the summer, because now they're used to going outside. Because of this, I will be out like for the Cinco de Mayo parade or different activities out in the community, and the children will be out with their families. It means that the mother had to get the stroller ready, the diaper bag, the formula, the special formula if the child's tube fed. It's a lot of work, but now they're used to doing all these preparations to go out into the community. We also do an annual picnic, and this is how we started our summer groups. I believe this year will be our 7th, if I'm correct. And it had, most of the families organize it. We provide the main dish typically, which because of all the children, it's pizza. It's just the thing that children want, it's pizza. So we'll provide the pizza, and then we make it a potluck so that families start participating. A lot of the groups some families will volunteer not only for the annual picnic, but also for the summer groups. They'll say, hey, let's do a potluck, and let's bring some things for next week, and we kind of organize it that way because now they feel part of the group. We're not doing a group for them to come in, but they're actually part of the group, and they start organizing these groups. We have done outings. We've gone to the zoo. The first year that DDI went to the zoo, none of our families participated. They didn't feel comfortable going out of the community. Now, not only do they go to our outings, but they make their own outings, and they'll get together and say, hey, let's go to X place, or, you know, Children's Hospital might be having their annual tree event, and they'll go to that. Or I had a couple of families this past Thanksgiving come to the Thanksgiving parade. None of our families had ever came to a Thanksgiving parade, and this year was the first year that they actually participated in that. I also go to IEPs, and I translate some of the information, interpret the meeting, and typically they're good IEPs. I have had some ugly experiences where I've had to stop the IEP, or we've had to take a break because things get too heated, but usually they're pretty good IEPs, and that's because we spend some time before the meeting with the family just talking about some of the issues that need to be addressed. Because I tell the families, I can't go in and say, you want this. We need to focus on what does the child need, the needs, not what you want. It's the child's needs. So once we talk about the issues that are going on, we can move forward at the meeting and make things nicer. A lot of doctor's appointments, and this is because of misinformation when people are getting the different diagnosis from doctors. There tends to be, because there is a lot of illiteracy in the Latino community, there tends to be some issues with understanding what's happening. For example, I see this a lot in my family. There's a lot of illnesses. And my father, who passed away already, but when he was younger, he was on dialysis for many years. And he had to have a heart surgery in order to be able to resist a kidney transplant. And he was on dialysis. He did not want the heart surgery, but he wanted the transplant. And the doctor kind of was trying to tell him that he had to have this. It was pretty important that he have the surgery before he could get a kidney. My dad didn't want to understand it that way. So he tells the doctor that he's going to Mexico and can this wait? And the doctor says, absolutely. This is not urgent. You can go to Mexico. When you come back, let's talk about it. Let's schedule something. Let's get your heart ready in case a transplant is matched with you. And so my dad comes out of the appointment and he says, see, I didn't need the surgery. I said, no. Yes, you do need the surgery. It's just not urgent, but you still need it. There tends to be this, I want to understand what I want to hear thing going on. So my dad comes back from Mexico, and I say, don't forget, you have to make your doctor's appointment. You have to get that surgery done. Okay. I remind him a couple of times later, and he just doesn't listen. He didn't want it. A kidney is matched, but he has not had the heart surgery. So he had to lose that kidney, and it had to be passed to somebody else. So after that, he says, okay, this is the situation. I don't want to be cut up all open like a cow. And I said, well, they don't do that anymore, Dad. They make these tiny little holes, and they fix your heart, and then you're all set to go. Really? Really? So he goes into his surgery. He's all happy. He comes out of the surgery. He sees he's all cut open from top to bottom, and he stares at me, gives me that look like, you lied to me. But he couldn't say anything because he was in a lot of pain. So he really wanted the kidney, but he was too afraid to do it because of the heart surgery. Once he wasn't afraid, he allowed the heart surgery. So I had to lie a little bit, but after that, he lived with this kidney for many years, and he was very happy. He did really good with it. And so sometimes, we have to tell the truth a little bit, but you have to listen to what people are saying and make sure they understand what you are saying, because there is this tendency to not understand, and part of it has to do with illiteracy. The other thing is sometimes you have to be very firm with families and tell them what's going on and not sugarcoat it too much. Because of this situation that we have with barriers, which is denial, illiteracy, and stigma, people might not want to hear what's really going on. I had a situation where this family kept on moving constantly, regularly, 1 week they moved 3 times in that same week. 3 times. Now, for all of us who have moved from one house to another, that's a pain. And one of the daughters calls me and tells me, we're moving again, and you need to talk to my mother, she said, because it's really stressing the whole family. So what I was doing every time she moved was kind of helping her organize everything. So making sure that everybody that needed to know where she moved knew where she moved to, and making sure that all the medical equipment was sent to the proper home and all that. So I had to meet with this family and say, we're not going to do this anymore. I said, this is affecting your whole family, so I am not going to help you with this anymore. You're going to have to figure it out. And she was very disappointed, but that has stopped her from moving so regularly. She now spends a year, 2 years in a home, which is much different from where she was. But because she knows she has to do so much preparation in order to be able to move, she thinks about it. The family's a lot happier. It's more stable because of it. And sometimes you just have to be the bad guy too, and just be very firm with families, especially when they don't want to understand or are having a hard time comprehending what you're trying to say. And the barriers, like I said, there's denial, there's illiteracy, and there's stigma. There's a lot of denials, particularly when we're talking about a cognitive impairment. That tends to really affect accepting this child with a disability. And I think a lot of it has to do with religion. As I said in the video with the Karen story, a lot of times, because most of Latin America is, we have severe Catholicism, and so sometimes we don't want to accept that maybe we were punished or something happened, or there's all this denial that happens with it, associated also with the stigma of you did something bad. But I've noticed it particularly with cognitive impairments. I had this family who had a child with moderate cognitive impairment, and the mother asked me flat out, what does this mean? And I said, well, it means that your child is never going to learn the same, that he's going to have this delay cognitively. She said, but I don't understand it. I said, it means that he's going to have some delays in the way he learns. He's just not going to be able to function normally because it is affecting him. And she wasn't getting any services because of that, because she just did not want to accept that this child had a cognitive disability. So no matter how I explained it, she would just not accept it. The child's now 8, and we have finally an appointment for June, okay? When I met her, the child might have been 4. This was about 4 years ago. It took her about 4 years to accept that this child has a cognitive delay. And she's finally getting services. Like I said, sometimes we do baby steps in the Latino community, and you can't force them to go faster. We would like to, but we can't force them. Illiteracy is a big issue. Not only illiteracy in reading in Spanish, but even understanding Spanish. There are many families who do not speak Spanish who are from Latin America. They speak dialects, or they speak some form of a native language like Quechua or some Nahuatl, some of the other forms of languages. And so that is a big problem, because you can not only not communicate with them because of their illiteracy, but they do not speak the language. So finding somebody that does is almost impossible. Stigma, there's a lot of stigma in the Latino community too. Like I said, because there tends to be this thought that if you have this child, it's because of some type of punishment. So breaking those barriers is quite hard. It makes it very difficult. But it's possible. It just takes a lot of patience and a lot of baby steps, and you can eventually do it. Not easy, but it can be done. Elizabeth stepped out for 1 second, so Give me 1 second. Okay.
Thank you so much, Julia. Really appreciated all your insight and your work. And I'm hoping that everyone in the audience got a lot of information that's going to improve their practice or just their day-to-day interactions with families. Before we go to the homework assignment, I'd like to, Julie and I talked about reflecting on the cultural competency checklist when working with families. And if Mike can't pull this up on the screen, you all received this via email.
I can.
It's the social workers cultural awareness checklist. I'm hoping you all received it. If you have not received it, I'm going to send it out to you today. All right. It's a wonderful little tool that we've kind of adapted through our years of practice here in our work with families at DDI. And the first thing on this checklist that you need to consider are the family sleeping patterns. Does the infant sleep in the same room or bed? It's just a checklist with bulleted points, and since I'm not sure you received it, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'd like Julie and I just to kind of touch on some of the most important things on this checklist. Like, for instance, I'm Italian, I told you that earlier, and I grew up in a family bed, okay? Now, if you came to my house when I was little, you might think that was odd that I slept with my mom, but that's how it is in our culture. And I actually rotate through the beds over to my sisters, my grandmas, and Julie is shaking her head. Maybe you can add to that.
Same thing with us. It's very common to have the child in the bed. There's a lot of breastfeeding also in the Latino community, so it is very common to have the child very close so that you could breastfeed. Very badly seen. Like I said, I worked for a hospital, and it was like, oh my God, what are you doing? But I raised my children that way too, and they were fine. You know, I'm a light sleeper. If I was a heavy sleeper, I probably wouldn't have done it. And with my second son, because he was on a monitor, he was born early. He did sleep in the crib when he was little, just because the monitor could pick our heartbeat, and he could actually stop breathing. But the rest of them, they slept with me.
Same at my house, and I know that this is kind of a politically charged topic at this point, so we're going to put our disclaimer out there, Julia and I. We're not medical personnel, but just we wanted to share that with you about our culture, and I did the same thing with my children as well. So the other thing on this checklist is the family's response to disobedience and aggression. Now, in my culture, where we were raised, my mother would, if we did something that was inappropriate or, inappropriate, I would say she would reprimand us verbally. If it was something major, she might yell, especially if we were outside. So a lot of Italians were yellers, and I think that no one would be offended by me sharing that. When I got married, I married into an Irish Catholic family, and they thought I yelled a lot. So anyway, and it's just the part of my culture and the way we're brought up. Didn't mean we were angry at each other. Didn't mean my mom was really angry with us. It was just that was the way she captured our attention occasionally. Now, disciplining, if it was really something major, my mom would give us a swat on the bottom. And then a very politically charged topic, we're going to put our disclaimer out there. I'm not saying that sort of punishment is appropriate, but I'm just sharing with you about my culture.
And in the Latino community, there's also a lot of yelling. But you have to understand, when the Romans took over Spain, really the Spanish became part Italian. And then the Spanish went to Latin America, and so you can see a lot of similarities with the way we raise children, the way we live, how family is so important, and even in some of the food, it's pretty similar. So it's not uncommon. We did a lot of yelling. In Latin America, there's something called la chancla, and the chancla is the shoe, and you kind of throw it like a boomerang. It's an art. And most Latin families are really good at la chancla and the way you throw it, because as the child is running away, you know, you kind of throw the shoe. Usually it's a soft shoe. Oftentimes it's a flip flop, but children, when they see the chancla, they know what it means.
Thank you, Julia. And I want to, just something you said there, Julia, about your family all living on the same block and everything, and how that doesn't mean that you are, and there's a question on the screen about engagement and enmeshment. So maybe this is a good place to address this with some real life examples. The fact that Julia's family lives on the same block, or that my grandmother lived with us and my, other family was right down the street as well, it doesn't mean our families were enmeshed, okay? It's still a healthy system. Everyone is, promoting everyone's well-being. They're supportive of each other and that sort of thing. It just means that we lived in close proximity to each other. And there's a question here about when it's unhealthy, okay? When it's an unhealthy enmeshment, it means that the family does not let anyone else in. They run things by each other before they make decisions on their own. They can often not stand on their own without their parents intervening or someone in authority taking over. In a disengaged system, it's the opposite. People don't really pay attention to each other in those types of families. They may not talk to each other very often or at all. This is in families where we might see what we call in social work cutoffs, where, a grandfather or whatever, or an aunt and uncle might not be dead, but you never grew up knowing them. They were just sort of shunned or outcast of the family. That's an extreme form of disengagement. Okay, so I hope that helps. There's a ton of literature out there about that. That's a big part of some of our graduate courses and undergraduate courses in social work. So today we didn't have the time to get into it a great deal, but there's places you can go to get more information about that. Just to touch quickly on a couple other things on this checklist before we wrap up on today is about families' perception on health and healing. And Julia shared that great story about her dad. The other thing I'd like to say about this is you might work with families who believe in using herbs, going to natural homeopathic doctors. They don't want to seek Western medical types of intervention. So we have to be careful about that.
Yeah, I particularly see it where the families will get medical attention for the child, but not for themselves. So they try to cure their diabetes or their high blood pressure, which both run very high in Latin culture, with teas and herbs. And I tell them that's fine, but also take your medicine, because you can't just take the tea and it's going to be cured. You really need to also take your medication. And I enforce that with the families, because I do see a lot of families with diabetes. I have diabetes myself, and high blood pressure. So I try to educate families when I do that, but without forcing it, because I know I can't force it.
Thank you. And then I think lastly, I'd like to talk about the family's perception of help seeking and intervention. And again, this is all on this checklist, so we're going to get this to you if you don't have it yet. These are some important things to think about, like how willing are they to go to school meetings and go to a therapist. And sometimes those of you that are doing, therapeutic type of work or support groups, and you're wondering why you're having difficulty getting people to those types of interventions, it can be based on your culture. And I know Julia reflected on some things in her culture about how people weren't coming to meetings and coming to our outings, but that also applies to formalized services too. And, for instance, older Italian, this has changed now, but my grandmother, her generation, my mother's generation, right, they did not seek out therapists. Things had to be pretty bad or be court mandated before they would seek out a therapist. You didn't talk to other people about your problems. You stayed and you honored the family. You went to the family. You went to your elders and those in authority and you talked about these problems. And it was rather looked down upon if you needed to seek formalized therapy systems. That has changed now, and thankfully so. You know, it's much more, I think, a general attitude that it's okay to seek therapy and to talk about some of these issues with professionals.
Yeah, we hold our meetings typically in a agency in Southwest Detroit where it's a community health agency. And so that in the beginning, you know, particularly the dads were like, oh, you're going to that place where they see people that are like this or like that, where now it's accepted. It's no big deal. The family started getting some services there, and they started feeling better and just, you know, more relaxed, more willing to accept the disability because they were able to talk to a professional about the issues that were going on in the family. So that has kind of slowly went away with a lot of the families. Still, some do not want those services, but many do, and it's working out really well. But like I said, you know, we just met there, and they started questioning, well, maybe I should talk to somebody. And slowly, you know, one went, and then she said she felt better, and then the next one went, and then 2 or 3 went. So it's slowly turning around.
Yeah, people are, you know, as they see maybe how other families are helped, they're more willing to participate. I'd like to, first, before we go through the homework assignment, Julie and I would like to know if there are questions out there today. Michael's helping us here. I answered that one. We're just reading here. Any questions from anyone in the audience before we go through the homework assignment? Questions you might have for Julia and working with Hispanic families, questions you might have for me on multicultural pluralism. It says, are enmeshed and disengaged families the same across the globe? I don't know if they're the same because, you know, as Julia reflected in her presentation, put everything out of your mind and realize people are very individualized as our families. But what I will say is across the globe, there are families that are enmeshed and there are families that are disengaged for many different reasons.
And I think socioeconomic status also has a lot to do with it. The families that have more education tend to have it more together just because they have a better understanding of what's going on, where families that have a lower socioeconomic status and might not have the resources to deal with whatever is happening, whatever medical or whatever issues happening with the child with a disability, tend to be more stressed and talk less and kind of isolate themselves. So I think it depends.
Any other questions for us today before we go to our homework assignment? Okay, without any further ado, let's get to the homework assignment for this week. Here are the directions. Please reflect on your own culture and think about what inspires you to be aware of your culture, such as cooking a traditional meal, learning a few words in your native language, wearing a traditional item of clothing, listening to certain types of music, and in 350 words or less, please write down your thoughts on this topic. So share with me what your culture is, and then pick something from this list here, you know, or you can pick even a cultural celebration, okay? You don't have to follow this list verbatim, but something that is unique to your culture you feel and you'd like to share it with us in 350 words or less. So put your culture down and then what it is you do uniquely that is specific to your culture, and write that down for me in a descriptive paragraph. It does not have to be 350 words, okay? If you can say it in less than that, that's a-okay with us. The other thing is if you don't identify with a specific culture, identify 3 ways to engage Hispanic families in the work that you do. All right, so if you're a person that doesn't really right away, like you're sitting there thinking, you know, I'm Canadian, or, but by the way, that's a culture. But if you're a person that doesn't identify with a culture, I don't want you to have to take the next 3 days to go, you know, talk to your family members and dig through your archives of your family to find out some things about your culture. You can do that out in the future. Let's make your life easy. Identify 3 ways to engage Hispanic families, which Julia gave you several, okay? And then just in 350 words, put 1, whatever that is, 2, whatever it is, 3, fully define it. And again, you can do it in 350 words or less, okay? So I'm hoping you'll all have not have any issues with this particular assignment. If you do, you can always email me with your questions, all right? And that's e.janks, Janks, @wayne.edu. And then remember to send your homework to the DDI at Wayne web email address, okay? So I think we're going to wrap up today. I want to thank Julia Hernandez today for being such an excellent presenter. It was really informative. I know you all got a lot out of it. I love her stories and real life examples because it makes it so much more interesting and easy to learn how we can incorporate best practices into our practice or our daily life if you're not working out there. And Michael, thank you for your tech support and your work with this. Again, next week we will have webinar number 6. The topic is evidence-based practices in family support and exemplary family support models when working with families who have children with developmental disabilities. So thank you very much. We look forward to you participating next week.